What I'm going to talk about, what is Browser Sound? It's a music festival, and it's one specifically for web audio and contemporary music. Those two kind of worlds, those two communities. I don't know if web audio, well, those things coming together. This festival, we commission new works of art. We hold workshops and classes for artists and developers, and we hold a festival every 2 years in Stuttgart, Germany, as well as online. What I'm kind of going to talk about today is what we've done in our past two festivals in 2021 and 2023, and kind of intersperse through that some comments or some reflections of that approach to making a festival with web audio and contemporary music at the center. How are we seeing web audio and how are we seeing contemporary music, this label for a particular type of experimental music, and ways they seem to gel really nicely, ways in which that union has presented challenges. A little bit about myself very quickly for context. I'm a composer, I'm a musician, and I'm also an educator. In my compositions, I do a lot of electroacoustic music, some of which works with web audio, some of which doesn't. I also teach kind of media technology and digital literacy and a little bit of coding at the New York Public Library in our Tech Connect program for kind of job preparation and computer training. And so web audio kind of exists in these two fields for me, and Browser Sound, the festival, is a sort of way to have the two overlap. It's a kind of initiative interested in making experimental art, but also an interest in building community. Labels, especially in music, are not always like a fun thing or an easy thing to give. When I talk about contemporary music, I'm kind of talking about a particular tradition and a particular community of artists that work from a history of having roles as composer and performer, composer and musician, people who come from an academic background or just some sort of background that has some sort of connection to the tradition of the avant-garde or of Western classical music. When I put these labels on, it is not to say, or it's always weird for me to label this, because I'm not interested in making labels, and part of community building for me is a lot about making things really approachable for people. But what I do all this labeling to say that kind of growing up as a composer and as a musician and someone always interested in kind of computational thinking in the creative domain, that can be really intimidating for a lot of people, especially those who kind of self-identify as composers or self-identify as performing musicians in like violin or piano, etc. And so by labeling those roles and kind of making those observations, wanted to create a community where people with a background in contemporary music could feel welcome to approach web audio creatively without necessarily having any experience with coding or things like that. I'm not, I think kind of coding, programming, creative coding, and web audio came later to me in my life than music. And so it doesn't feel native to me, but I also hope in this project to do the reciprocal for the developers, for the people who kind of work with a computer science background, the way that they're kind of engaging with our festival. I'm hoping for it to also be a way in which they can feel like they can really engage artistically and intellectually. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we actually did at these festivals. In Browser 2021, we had a fully online festival, and it kind of centered around 5 commissioned works. The works we commissioned were websites that would be kind of visited online because we had a fully online festival. The commissions were given out from a call for proposals, and we allowed in the proposal for the applicants to self-identify either as an artist or as a developer or as both artist developer. And we chose 10 of those people. We had them kind of meet up with each other online. They paired themselves up, and they together would create these new these new websites that were works of art. And throughout a kind of 3-month period of creation, we would meet about 6 times over Zoom and do kind of workshops. We would invite some artists who have kind of, web audio artists, one could say, people who have a web audio as a practice in their art, would come and give a masterclass to these works in progress, give their thoughts. And then we kind of premiered it over Zoom on a website. We used Mozilla Hubs to make an interesting kind of VR gallery experience of it too. What you see on the screen is one of the pieces that we commissioned. It's called Data Please, and it's a website that is kind of primarily driven by motion tracking through a camera, but also kind of artistically plays upon ideas of data collection and the ways that we as users participate in data collection. I want to show another excerpt, just without kind of talking about it. This is another piece we commissioned. It's called Packet Sphere, Internet Travelogue, and it's kind of a piece of experimental fiction. And it is about the way that information travels, how data travels physically across the world, and kind of seeing that through the lens of a logistical process, kind of like how if you mailed a package. This is an excerpt that's about 90 seconds long.
Okay. Okay. Hello. 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 Okay.
Kind of a theme about this first festival was, and maybe you could tell from the way we proposed this like call of artists and developers, is kind of interrogating this label of the developer and the artist. And I think that a big part of what defines a lot of practices in the contemporary music community that I'm a part of is that people will identify sometimes as composer and sometimes as performer and sometimes as both, but that even though that there's this ability for a kind of crossover or hybrid role, that those roles of composer and musician are very kind of set in the background. And this is kind of a distinction that is not necessarily like hanging over the head of working in a web audio context. And so it actually feels kind of jarring to say, like, are you an artist or are you a developer? And we kind of wanted that to be front of mind. And a lot of these ways that these pairs of artists and developers would work together would kind of reflect that tension. So one of them is this piece called Vishavanka JS. It's a kind of interactive web page that plays on the kind of embroidery of a kind of type of embroidery tradition in Ukraine. And it was created by Solomia Moroz and Kurt Miller. And both of these people kind of worked in equal tandem as artists coming up with this artistic direction and the pitch material and the color material, and they also equally took time to kind of write code and build it up. And then we had other projects that were quite different. We had a project by Nikolai Suslov and Delia Rodriguez. This clip doesn't have any sound. And Delia is a violinist. She had no prior experience with any sort of coding or any knowledge of web audio. Nikolai primarily works as a software engineer. And so they came together and they had pretty defined roles. They would speak about the kind of artistic direction, but then Delia spent a lot of her time building recordings and videos and coming up with pieces of music to perform as a violinist. And then Nikolai created this kind of peer-to-peer live coding space. And it was a way of, I guess the title is This Is Not a Concert, but it kind of is like we come together and it's a concert experience. It's like an interactive concert hall that the audience can in real time sort of filter and change and process visually as well as sonically. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but then we would have these workshops. They would kind of show their pieces to us as well as to some other people working in web audio. Just a few people that were with us. We had Yotam Mon, who is the author of Tone.js, come and talk about Tone.js for a bit. We had Lawrence E. Nowin, who is a kind of web audio composer, artist, figure, who has this kind of practice of making heavy metal, generative heavy metal in the browser, was doing a bit of that. And that was our 2021 festival. And a few reflections that came from that was that, it was really lovely and sweet and encouraging to see all the people from the contemporary music community that showed up. We felt that it kind of achieved the sort of goals of being welcome or accessible for musicians and people on the contemporary music sphere. We felt that some ways to grow in the future was that for those people, maybe people like Nikolai, who work as computer engineers primarily, or who have a very high technical acuity for computer science, and also come with a lot of really interesting kind of ways of approaching creativity that come from that background. They were not, we didn't really have an infrastructure to really support that. You know, if we pair everyone up to make these works, and also these master classes, which are presented to a general audience of artists and coders and whoever, it was a broad audience, and so the language kind of had to be suited for that, and felt that people like Nikolai, they couldn't really reach their full potential in that infrastructure. And so a little bit of what we did in 2023, for many reasons, we also held it in person as well. We felt like 2021, during a kind of post-pandemic state, it felt very appropriate to have things online, not just logistically, but also, it's in the air. We were all online in a way at that time. But 2023, this was just last summer. Things are different. And also we feel like a big part of how we use the web is not just sitting in front of a computer at our desks, but it's in our phones. It's everywhere we look that has a screen. There's a kind of way that the web exists in the physical world. And so when we commissioned 4 new works for this festival, they were works that were specifically tasked with creating a hybrid work of art, a work of art that would be performed in person as well as experienced in person and online live at the same time. I'll show 2 brief excerpts. This one is a piece called Fold by Ted Moore. It's a piece for a pianist that is live, as you can see on the screen. And then we have 2 musicians, one of them, Kurt Miller, who wrote Vishavanka with Solomia, is in Rhode Island with a kind of self-built feedback instrument with his clarinet, and then Jana de Troyer is in Hamburg with the same feedback instrument. And I'll play a little bit of the excerpt, and then I'll talk a bit more about it. just a little bit more about what was going on there. And also we had every composer or artist kind of present on that work in a post-concert kind of talk the next day. But all the pitch material you were hearing, that was from these feedback systems that were occurring remotely, and they were kind of being piped in into this kind of max patch server, big, fancy thing that would also kind of analyze that feedback pitch content and then present it to the pianist in a live score on an iPad that would sort of give the pitch material that he's playing. Another quick excerpt is we had a work, Aliasing X Aliasing by Evelyn Lindbergh and Stefan Reichelt. This was a VR and an AR sound installation. My AR clip is not very interesting, but you can kind of see it briefly there. You would move around with your phone with some headphones, and you'd have a kind of binaural audio experience, and sound sculptures would be placed in the space that you'd be walking around. And then we also had, as a complement to that, a kind of static web page that presented a VR experience that is not the same as the AR experience, but kind of aesthetically complementary, that is a bit more of like a video game environment. A kind of big difference here is when I was talking about that infrastructure from Browser 2021, the ways that we wanted to kind of open up a space for maybe the upper and lower bounds of what could kind of be achieved on a technical front with these works. One way we achieve that is our commissions, they were not sort of tied with this kind of interplay of artist and developer. We just held an open call, and anyone who is anyone could apply, and they presented these concepts, and we chose them. We also, instead of just having a set of workshops, we had two separate tracks. We had a kind of show and tell session track. This is actually just very kind of similar to a set of like papers and talks. No one wrote a paper, but they kind of showed up and gave a talk. People with existing projects that are interested in web audio or focused on web audio sort of showed their works, and then in complement or in partnership with that, the actual workshops we held, I just taught a kind of, like a beginner JavaScript course for anyone who, most of the people who came were artists, as well as a few kind of just people who were beginner coders. And there was nothing particularly, it was very straightforward, just basics of JavaScript, as well as a bit of like P5.js as like a bridge into making some actual kind of sound and visuals that people could work with. And the workshops culminated in a final project presentation that people could give. These show and tell sessions were really interesting for me. They're pretty mind-blowing, like the things that people come up with. Jonathan Bell, a professor and a composer in Marseille, France, presented Patchworld, which is a kind of sort of VR kind of online server that people can come into, and these giant worlds are actually instruments that he builds, and he's building them using kind of concepts of concatenative, like corpus-based concatenative synthesis of many, many audio files and samples that you can see are kind of interspersed here and here and here. Goni Pellis presented Scorecraft, which is an online audio-based multiplayer game. Reminds me of Mario Party, but where you get to scream into your mic, and maybe do other things besides that. I would do a lot of screaming into the mic during these sessions. And then we also had Score Follower come in. Scorefolio is a platform, social media platform, and like a portfolio tool for composers. So it's not actually like a work of art per se, in the kind of conventional sense, but it's like a service. It's a subscription service that provides kind of professional tools for composers. I'm kind of blazing through the end, just because I'm kind of coming to time, but as I mentioned, the idea behind these, the way that this festival was made, was to create a kind of union of two worlds. I feel like the big fear or the impetus of starting Browser Sound was also a little bit selfishly like, oh, I like contemporary music and I find web audio fascinating. Let's just make an event with both of those. But I didn't want to just have the kind of subset of people who just do both of these things to be involved. I wanted them to be present, but also just wanted anyone curious in web audio and curious in contemporary music to drop in. And I feel like for the contemporary music world, this has been moving in a really good track. It's involved a lot of kind of identifying just barriers of entry, often the same barriers of entries that come with just learning how to code and how to teach people code. And there's so many resources of those out there already that we've been able to adopt and bring in. I feel like some challenges that are present for the future is thinking about more in depth of the true scope of how web audio can kind of be present in this festival. I think that over this conference and just out there in general, there are so many interesting tools and frameworks and applications for coding education or web audio kind of creative work, things like this. The world is bigger than just Tone.js and P5 sound, and that feels like a wider world that we haven't fully explored yet. And hoping not to just like have composers like me be teaching JavaScript, but also maybe have people who are really, really, truly expert in these particular frameworks come in and help us out as well. I'm gonna open it up for questions and thoughts in general in a moment. Please feel free to